It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo, and I am with my awesome friend, Yusuf. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Yusuf or Yusuf Ponders. I'm a YouTuber. I have a channel called The Pondering Soul. So if you search that, probably pop up. Or if you search Yusuf Ponders as well. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook if you search at Yusuf Ponders. And I have a website, ponderingsoul.blog. My background is philosophy, so I did a BA in philosophy where the focus was mainly nihilism is what I did my dissertation on. I also touched on things like metaphysics, philosophy of religion, Greek philosophy, pre-Socratics, the history of philosophy, logic and reason, things like that. So that's kind of where my expertise is. And then I've been, since finishing uni in 2019, I think it was, I've just been kind of focusing on my YouTube channel. And I've been doing a bit of work with the Sapiens Institute, which is an organization set up by Hamza Zortsus. And there's a few people doing that. I've done some work with Sabor Ahmed. There's a playlist on my channel, presentation that I did, kind of going over that. And then other than that, there's also the TAP show or the Thought Adventure podcast that you jumped on. The first episode I think you were on, which I do with a few. Yeah, I do that with a few brothers. I think you were our first guest as well. Mashallah. So that was it was a lovely little conversation about Christianity and just about what we were aiming kind of to do with that little podcast that we'd set up with a little team of brothers. Now, other than that, it's a very general overview of me, I guess. I'm from Manchester, England. Yeah, I don't know what else I could tell you there.
Okay, can you talk about like your journey from when you were a child? What kind of belief system were you raised in? And then like what was your philosophical quest or religious quest and like what were the milestones maybe until you have reached where you are right now to be a devout Muslim?
Yeah. So I was born in England, but my dad is from Glasgow, Scotland, and my mother is from Poland. So he was born there. My mum was born in Poland. They met somewhere on some holiday camp in between Manchester and Glasgow, and then I ended up being born. They were both Catholic. My dad was a bit of a naughty one. So although he was Catholic, and from what I can tell when I read his stuff, he does seem to believe in God. But he was always in and out of prison. He was a bit of a Jack the Lad, known for stealing, and had a bad drug problem. So he was a heroin addict, and that took his life when I was 9 years old. My mum, she's a Catholic. She was raised in a very heavy religious Polish Catholic family. Like everyone in my family in Poland always has like pictures of the Pope up, especially the Polish Pope, John Paul II, I think he was called, all over the house. So they were very, very religious, but they had their own issues. My mum kind of ended up rebelling against them when she got a bit older, and sort of had to run away. And she was always still Catholic. And so when I was born and my brother was born, we were being raised. We were sent to Catholic schools. We were christened, we were baptized, we went to a Sunday school. It was a Polish Sunday school, which was run by some priests and nuns. And we would go there every Sunday. And and so like we did go to church quite often. But then like as we were getting older and older, my mum was sort of struggling. Eventually my dad passed away, like I said, when I was 9. And at some point, maybe a little bit before then or just after or around about that time, she didn't lose her faith. Like she's never been an atheist, but she just became really disenfranchised with the church. She was asking the priest a number of questions and could never get answers to them. So we kind of ended up stopping the religious side of life. And then I kind of became a bit of a miso-theist. So like I was quite resentful about what happened with regards to my dad. A bit of a weird relationship with him, kind of a love-hate one. And it sort of led me away from God, and like I kind of drifted out of misotheism to just apathy about the idea of God, and then just towards full atheist. So I was a positive atheist in the sense that I held a belief that I knew God didn't exist, and it was usually along the lines of the problem of evil, specifically with the evil I'd kind of experienced in my life, and just of a kind of general thing. I was looking at the way throughout my teenage, I went into high school, I became like full atheist, and that was the case until I was about, I think, 17. I was always like against the idea of religion. I just considered it this, the cliche, it was only ever made to control the populace, and that was its only function. The powerful control the weak, kind of mentality. And when I was 17, I started working at I think you've got them over there as well, but Pizza Hut, like a restaurant. And there was a few Muslims that worked there, and I got really pally with them. And they weren't trying to do dawah to me or anything like that to begin with. It was just they worked where I worked, and we just used to chill and go about and do bits and bobs. And eventually, we used to go to this place called Wimmy Road in Manchester, which is just basically there till stupid o'clock in the morning talking about anything and everything. I was kind of getting into my conspiracy theory age at that point as well. So I was watching all of these documentaries about this, that, and the other, the 9/11 stuff. They told me to watch something that was called, what was it called now? It's like a series called The Arrivals. And again, this was kind of like a series of videos focused on this idea of the Illuminati, and but it was like a Shia-based series that ends up doing like a bit of dawah, trying to get people to become Shia. And so they were getting me to watch that, although they weren't Shia. I don't think they even really knew that it was Shia. But yeah, and so like I was getting into a lot of this sort of opened up my question phase. So I'd get into a lot of conversations with them about God. We started asking questions about the Quran, about obviously all the controversial stuff, like the mention of slavery, the mention of pretty much everything, the hot topics that come up usually with regards to Islamic apologetics. The idea of God, whether or not God exists, questions on evolution. We pretty much covered all the posts. We were going through it, and they were very chilled with me. I can be quite annoying in the sense that like I ask way too many questions, and I don't stop asking them. I just kind of like tumble down the rabbit hole persistently. And They were very accommodating to that for some reason. Usually people get very bored and you can see they sort of dry up in the eyes and they don't really want to talk about things like life and death and God, and they would much rather talk about the weather and stuff like that. And so they were quite chilled. They were allowing me to ask these controversial questions. When they didn't have the answers, they'd go and look for them. And they didn't just give answers for the sake of it. They were always like quite open to admitting when they didn't know. It was really refreshing. So that kind of, after talking to them for a few years, kind of opened me up, made me more agnostic. I stepped back from this idea that I knew God didn't exist, because the arguments I was putting forward, there was always like possible answers they could give, which sort of destroyed the solidity of that belief of mine. And eventually, just kind of drifted around in agnosticism and then back and forth, maybe to sort of atheistic position, depending on who I was with, I guess. Being a young lad, easily impressionable. If you're with a bunch of atheists, you kind of identify as one. If you're agnostic. If you're with people who are more faith inclined, then you're more open to agnosticism. A bit like a social comedian, I think is probably the best way of putting it. And then, so I was working in call centers quite a lot. I was very materialistic. Loved saving money and getting a couple of grand and then just blowing it all on clothes and jewelry and aftershaves and consoles and games and that crap. And that was lasting for a while. Like I was very heavy into the weed culture at the time and drinking and going out here and there. And eventually I just started getting quite tired of it. It started feeling a bit repetitive. Felt like I was going in circles. I wasn't really enjoying it as much as everyone made out like you should be. I always felt like a bit of an imposter whenever I was going out drinking. And so I kind of became a bit depressed, decided that I was going to go traveling. So I saved up, I think like $7,000 or something, and then just bought a one-way ticket to South Korea. And I sold everything that I had, and I just had this tiny little backpack with a couple of pair of spare clothes in there. Went to South Korea. The plan was I was only going to be gone for like 6 months, and I wanted to try maybe see like 18 countries. But after like 6 months of traveling, I didn't want to go home, so I quit my job because I had a break on my contract, and they said I could come back so long as it was after 6 months. I really didn't like that idea, so I just didn't bother at all. So I quit my job and I carried on traveling for another year. So I was out there for about 18 months in total. I wasn't too far off the Philippines. I would have tried going there, to be honest. But I just kind of got caught up in other things. So I ended up doing South Korea, Taiwan. I was in Malaysia, Borneo, Singapore, Thailand, Myanmar. And so I was just kind of bopping about there. I spent most of my time in Malaysia. I ran a bar there for about 8-9 months, I think, on an island called Tioman. So I was there for quite a bit, living on the island, and then I went to Thailand and I worked in a place called the Tiger Temple in Kanchanaburi, very controversial place. It got closed down maybe a year after I'd left. And there I just basically kind of looked after tourists and looked after the baby tigers and kept their cages clean and took them for walks and played with them and stuff like that. And so eventually, after 18 months, I started running out of money and decided I need to come back home. And I decided I kind of got forced to it because there wasn't really any other option. I couldn't get any more paid work or anything like that. So I booked a ticket back home to Manchester, flew back, surprised my family. The plan is that I only wanted to come back temporarily for like 3 months, and then I was going to set off traveling again. This time I wanted to kind of walk across Europe and just kind of be a vagabond for a bit, by choice, drifting about and trying to figure stuff out. But then after 3 months, because of circumstances, I wasn't able to stay at my mum's house. I had to move into a house with my brother. But then because we moved into a house, we had to pay rent. Because we had to pay rent, I had to get a job, which meant we had to pay bills. And then I couldn't really save money as much as I wanted to anyway. And so I ended up kind of getting stuck. And but I still had this plan. I still wanted to kind of go out there and travel and maybe save the world. in some way, and I kind of became more resentful of the quote unquote the normal life. You know, I got working 9 to 5, and my mentality went a bit west. Like I started being, I was probably quite annoying to a lot of people, because I was just talking about everyone quitting their job, everyone should go travel, but a lot of people that I knew like had kids, or you know, they were committed to full-time work, and that option just wasn't really ever a possibility for them. And so there were some people that really liked it, but I was like Marmite at that time, I guess. Either people loved speaking to me or they hated it. And that kind of messed about with my mental health, I guess. So I ended up becoming quite isolated. I ended up getting into a few awkward moments. So when I was living with my brother, because obviously bills were kind of creeping up, a couple of his mates ended up moving in with us, but then tensions kind of got a bit too high. I ended up strangling one of them, and getting into a couple of scuffles here and there. So I had to move out and live on my own. My brother got a dog and then didn't want it, but because I was on my own in the house all the time, I was looking after it. I got quite attached to him. So I ended up with this puppy, and I ended up in this house on my own for a bit. I was reading into, so when I was traveling, spent a lot of time in Buddhist temples. So I was learning a lot about Buddhism. Obviously I had that background in Christianity. I was looking into Hinduism. I was reading a lot about New Age religion. So I was really into authors like Ram Dass. What's that other one called? It's a while ago now, about 7 years ago. The one who wrote Eckhart Tolle. So those types. And I was really just trying to like figure out what's going on with the world, what's happening with me, where am I, what's my purpose, what's truth, you know, is the Buddhist position true, is the Hindu position true, is Christianity true, is Islam true, is Judaism true? So I was really, really trying to get my head around all of these things. For the most part, I found Buddhism and Hinduism to just kind of be mostly at conflict with itself, and Buddhism was quite airy and didn't really give many answers here and there, and it was always quite super vague. Hinduism was just kind of riddled with contradictions, and it didn't make any sense to me. The more I tried to look into it, the more it kind of led towards this idea of monotheism at its root, that just kind of extrapolated into this sort of creative expression of that original monotheistic root that sort of expressed itself in a multiplicity and then became confused to the point where people can't even distinguish whether or not it's like a hard polytheistic religion or a soft polytheistic, in the sense that is each of these gods individual gods, or do they all consider them expressions of the same one god, or what's going on there? But I think that was a consequence of them kind of letting it get a bit too creative, where people basically just get to say whatever they want about God, and then you just end up with everyone saying everything about God, whether or not there is any coherency or conflict or not within the religion. So I ended up writing that off, and as well, I ended up writing off the New Agey kind of religions as well for the same reason. And I was sort of, in the end, any polytheistic religion sort of became incomprehensible for the same reasons as Hinduism did. This idea of a multiplicity of gods just did not add up to me. So I ended up leaning towards the Abrahamics. So obviously being Catholic, I was trying to get my head around, well, is that true? Or is Judaism true, or is Islam true? And having had conversations with the Muslim friends, I'd read the Quran when they gave me one a few years back when I was an atheist. But when I read it the first time, because I was a disbeliever, it felt very much like it was always shouting at me. So the bits that stood out the most was, oh, you're going to hellfire, this is what's going to happen when you're there, blah, 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 blah. And those bits, obviously, because they related to me, seemed to shine out more, and I kind of honed in on them. And then obviously the controversial aspects, like the slavery aspect, etc. Multiple wives, the verses about the female testimony, needing two females if a male isn't present. The questions were kind of focused around that. And I guess that kind of shaped and painted the way I viewed the Quran. And then coming back to it after traveling and kind of being in this point where I'm really trying to figure it out, being quite isolated, Just checking, you're still there. You've not lost the internet or anything, have you? You're still here. Okay. So yeah, and so basically it got to a point where it's like monotheism was the only way. And to cut like a really, really, really long story short, it just seemed to me to make sense that it would have to be one of the three major monotheistic religions, as well, because looking into Jehovah's Witnesses and things like Mormonism, they just seemed, again, incoherent, and it gets to a point where they even become somewhat, Mormonism especially ends up becoming somewhat polytheistic. Everyone can become a god in the end, kind of idea, which I found absurd. And so yeah, it was either Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Judaism seemed to me to not be the truth, simply because I didn't believe Jesus was a criminal. I thought the things that they said about him to be a far shot off the truth. And there was a number of issues I had with Judaism in the sense that they were meant to be the chosen people. I had no doubt that they had some sort of connection with God. I considered them monotheists, and I inclined to their conception of God, but what's the best way of putting it? They became very insular, to the point where they don't do dawah. They don't call people to the religion like it was meant to be. They were supposed to be a light for the earth, where they guide everyone to the worship of the one God, one that isn't a multiplicity or isn't divisible, but he is the absolute. And that was, as far as I could tell, their mission. They were supposed to call people to that. But now it's not pretty much. They exactly do the opposite. They do anti-dawah. They call people away. If you try to become a Jew, they actively dissuade you from doing it, tell you to stay. Because if you become a Jew, you've got to follow the 600 and odd, however million commandments that the Jews have to follow. Whereas if you don't become a Jew, then you only need to follow the very few, not many. I always thought it was 10 commandments, but I've heard Jews say the 7 commandments or something. So I think they only have a limited amount that the non-Jews need to follow. So they try to get you not to become a Jew. And then there's no kind of like welcoming into the community or anything like that. People who do kind of become interested in it are just sort of left to make their own community on the outside. And so, like, along with that and their views of Jesus and the things that, calling him like a criminal, a liar, or this, that, and the other, it seems to me to be enough to write them off as a possibility. And then it kind of left me with Christianity and with Islam, and the kind of thinking and looking into this whole concepts of the Trinity. To me, just didn't seem to make sense. I always saw Jesus specifically as an important figure, as a great man, but I could never kind of transcend beyond that. I could never get to this idea of Jesus as God. I could never get my head around the idea of the Trinity, especially when I was reading the verses in the Bible. I know that these are obviously quite hot topics in apologetics, and there's a lot that gets said back and forth. Over the years, I've carried on looking into it, and if anything, I'm just kind of more and more convinced every time I get into these or whenever I'm listening. And obviously there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of more abstract discussion that's probably way beyond my caliber. Inshallah, I'll get to a point where I can maybe engage with that and understand it a bit more. But it just, to me, seems incoherent. Like, you read the Bible, Jesus says specifically that only God knows the hour. So this means that Jesus isn't all-knowing. However, if Jesus is God, God is all-knowing, and you're saying Jesus is God and fully human, you're saying Jesus is A and not A simultaneously, which just doesn't make any sense to me. How can God both be knowing, all-knowing, and ignorant at the same time? It seems like a blatant contradiction. And then there's the issues surrounding the ideas of the law of identity, which basically, again, if you're saying that the Father is God, that is, the Father is A, Jesus is A, and the Holy Spirit is A, then to some degree, you're making the claim that there is, whatever A is, they all share in that. However, if Jesus is at any point not A, I can never get my head around the explanations that try to reconcile that. So yeah, and then obviously there's the typical verses that people bring up. So Jesus is on the cross and he shouts out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" That didn't make sense to me. The moments where Jesus, alayhi salam, is wandering through the desert and the devil is trying to tempt him, and when they're on the mountain, the devil offers Jesus the world and he says, "I'll give you all of this if you follow me." But the devil in the Bible knew who God was. He didn't have to like have faith or believe. He was in a council. He spoke to God when he was discussing Lot, and they had direct communication. So the devil didn't have any doubts about who God was, about God's existence, and he would know that God is the owner of all things. So what on earth is the devil offering Jesus if he knew Jesus was God? Like what that story to me just doesn't make any sense. If Jesus is God, and the devil knows who God is, the devil would also know that there's nothing that he can offer to Jesus. And if anything, the apologetics surrounding all of these, it just flips back and forth from admitting Jesus's humanity and then denying it simultaneously. If Jesus, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot obviously that can go into it. I don't want to kind of ramble for too long on the subject, but the more I looked into it, the more Jesus just struck me as a great human being, and not as God. I couldn't reconcile that or the Trinity. None of it made sense to me as much as I tried to figure it out. And so then I was left just with like either Islam or nothing. And so I spent more time looking into Islam. I read the Quran again. This time being more agnostic and more open to the idea of God. It just it read it as a completely different book. So there was a lot of verses that just didn't shine out as much when I was like a hardcore atheist, that began to seem a lot more relevant and to shine forth a lot more. And it just spoke to me in a completely different way. Then I was looking into the arguments for pure monotheism, for Tawheed, versus the Trinity. I was watching a lot of debates back then, a lot of discussions. I can't remember the majority of them. I just remember being extremely convinced by Tawheed, by this idea of the oneness of God. And so I was like, so what's going on with Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What's going on with his companions? May Allah be pleased with them all. And so I started reading into his life. I started reading into the life of the companions, and I was very moved by their stories. It got to a point where it's like, I can't really see Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as any of these claims that they were making against him. I can't see him as a liar. I can't see him as someone that was just in it for power or for money or for fame or status or women or this or that. Because there was a number of examples where he could have, if that was the case, there would have been certain outcomes to certain events that would have occurred, which he didn't follow up on. And so it kind of writes them out. And the companions, there was some very moving stories. You had people like Umar, who at one point wanted to kill the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and ended up becoming one of the staunchest advocates. And the transformation that even that particular character went through, towards the end of his life, he was completely transformed. And there was a number of stories from all the different Sahaba that I found quite touching and transformative, and very telling of the fact that they believed in the message that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with. And so after really, really considering it, it got to a point where I really didn't want to become a Muslim because it was, I already felt pretty isolated and weird. I wasn't really talking to many Muslims at that time because this was many years after. I wasn't exactly engaged with du'at or anything, so I wasn't speaking to people that were actively trying to convert me. I was just kind of sat on my own. And if I became a Muslim, that meant I was going to pretty much isolate myself even more. It meant having to change my life. So I was very heavy on the weed at that point. I was quite promiscuous, or I was into kind of floating about a bit. And obviously, if I did become a Muslim, I'd have had to give a lot of all this up, and then have to deal with the awkwardness of telling people that I was Muslim, and then, oh, well, all the awkward questions that kind of follow from that. Obviously, it's the most controversial religion in the world. There's a lot of negative press on it. There's a lot of negative media. And the idea of having to deal with all these questions and dealing with that kind of thing really put me off taking my Shahada for a little while. Even though I had this belief in my heart that I did believe in God, that there was only one God. I did believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a prophet. I did believe the Quran was the word of God. I did believe Jesus alayhi salam was a prophet and the Messiah, but that he wasn't God. I believed all of these things wholeheartedly. I just couldn't pull myself to kind of taking the Shahada and then living it and showing it externally, mainly because I was afraid of social consequences. But eventually it became a bit silly. It was like letting my fear of society sort of make my decision for me. And so I took the leap and eventually just took my Shahada, but continued to sort of be isolated. So I wasn't really, like, I didn't have the, I was suffering from like social anxiety at the time. So I didn't really have the confidence to go into like mosques or anything, or to speak to other Muslims. I had a couple of friends, the Muslims that I used to talk to from back in the day. They'd come visit me once every blue moon, mainly because I didn't like having visitors that much, and we'd chill, but we didn't really talk too much about religion at that point. It was just kind of like relaxing with people that I knew and talking about this, that, and the other. And so after a little while, kind of trying to figure things out, get a foundation, a footing, eventually went to college with the intention of studying zoology, because I was just getting sick of kind of being locked up in the house and being isolated all the time. I needed to get out and do something. So I thought, I'll become a zoologist. I'll work with animals. I really like animals. I worked with them a bit in the Tiger Temple. And there was millions of like stray cats and stuff at the Tioman Island in Malaysia where I was working. So I was always like surrounded by animals. I always loved the company. And I always found it better company than most humans sometimes. So I went to college, studied combined science with the intention of going into uni to study science further. I did really well at that. I finished with a distinction, which was the highest grade. I got a certificate for like the most improved student as well, because when I first went in there, it'd been absolutely years since I'd been in education. And I was always a naughty kid in high school, and I dropped out of college twice. And so when I was younger, I was never really good with education and with educational figures. And so that obviously I made a bit of a struggle going back into education the first time, in, I think it was 2017. It was the first time I went back. But I did really well in the end, alhamdulillah. But by the end of it, I changed my mind. I didn't really want to continue pursuing science. I found it a bit I preferred the exciting science, and it just felt like there was a lot of boring work that was involved in order to get to the exciting science. And even then it was very far and few between. So I just kind of become disenfranchised with the idea of just continuing that into uni, especially when going to the unis to have a look at the different kind of science, zoology courses or wildlife biology courses. I was looking at like things that they wanted you to do in order to get your degree. It was just not something that enthralled me. But then I found the philosophy course, and like some of the first units of like death, God, and the meaning of life, mind, reason, reality, the history of philosophy, and blah, blah, blah. And so I was absolutely gripped by that. And I thought, no, I'll go and study philosophy. It's asking, I get to ask all these weird questions. Whereas when I was in my science classes, I wasn't allowed to ask too many questions. Most of the time it was like memorizing equations and how to use them and blah, 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 blah. Like it was never so much like questioning the foundations of it all, or the assumptions that were being made here or anything like that. Whereas philosophy allowed me to do that. And it was the first time I'd ever like kind of, I was told that I should ask more questions. And like there was never like, I don't know, it was a really strange experience going from dealing with people not really enjoying your questioning too much to all of a sudden this becoming a great thing. And then obviously something that would ended up being a great benefit to the degree as well. I ended up, after 3 years past uni, I completed my degree with a first class, which again is the highest you can get in a degree. And so I do plan as well to kind of continue my studies. Inshallah, I want to do a master's in philosophy as well. So I'm in the process of trying to get funding for that. So hopefully that'll work out. Just got to try find what uni I want to study with. And obviously with the lockdown, that kind of complicates things a little bit as well. But yeah, so at the moment, just focusing on my channel and trying to get that done. During uni, I ended up getting married. I had a daughter, so I've got a 3-year-old. And yeah, and there we are at today, where I'm currently engaging in apologetics and YouTube and stuff like that.
Okay, cool, man. That's a really interesting story, and I'm really, curious as to like what impact like traveling got, and how it influenced you and how to be more open to accepting Islam, right? Because before being born in this in the UK, and as a hardcore atheist, you were probably not really that open to it, right? But being exposed to the cultures and all that stuff, traveling in Asia, that sort of opened your mind to Islam as well, right?
Yeah. So when it's weird because I don't know if I would say the traveling made me more open or not. I was already quite open, although I was like in my teenage years, I was very close-minded. It was more when I became when I left high school and I dropped out of college. I was working and I was working in a lot of restaurants, so I was always doing customer service. My mum was a manager of a restaurant, so I was working behind the bar in her restaurants, and I was always talking to loads of different people, and serving different people, and I was a very sociable person. And then obviously having a family that was from all over the place, a bit of a Heinz baby. So my mum being from Poland, I was always around people speaking foreign languages. My estate was a bit of a strange place. There was a lot of things going on there. So like I was always a very open, sociable person. Like I never really had problems talking to people, regardless of what they believed. So I wasn't closed in that sense. Like even if I was a heavy atheist, I was still open to like a discussion with people who didn't agree with me. If anything, I really loved it. And I'd get into arguments quite a lot. The thing that traveling done mainly was just kind of helped me to zoom out a lot more and see the bubbles that we all live in. And obviously there was huge culture shocks. Like going from living in Manchester my whole life, the only time I'd ever really been away was either to go to Amsterdam. Like I say, I used to be a huge pothead, so like Amsterdam was a common place for me to go. Or I went on like a lad's holiday to Turkey once for 2 weeks. I went to Gran Canaria with a mate. So I had foreign mates. I had Pakistani friends. One of my mates, he was from Gran Canaria. When I went there, I went to see his family. I had mates here, there, and everywhere. My family being Polish as well. So that being exposed to different cultures was kind of present already. The thing that traveling did was more not having anything. So like whenever prior to the travel, if I ever went abroad, I always had a home to go back to. I always had things. And then when I went traveling, I sold everything. So the whole lot, like there wasn't anything that I kept. All of it was gone. And then all I had was just a little crappy, I've still got the bag actually, but it was a really, really tiny bag. It was bad quality as well, because like within the first month, it was just starting to fall apart. And so by the end of the trip, still had the same bag, but I had to sew it 1,000,000 times. So it's just like loads of thread keeping it together. And I had a couple of things, and then it was just a case of like living chaotically. So I never had any plans. I didn't really know where we were going. Now, when we went to South Korea, we landed. We didn't have a hotel booked. We didn't really know anything about it. We just like, right, well, we're here now. I guess the first thing we've got to do is try to get to the city center or near somewhere we can maybe find a hostel. So we walked for like 2 hours because we couldn't figure out. We felt like all the taxi drivers were trying to rip us off, so we didn't end up getting a taxi. We just walked and walked for hours and hours and tried to find somewhere we could get Wi-Fi. We got on the Wi-Fi. We tried to Hotel World or whatever it's called. Tried to find a hotel, found one, and then walked there for hours. Eventually got there, and then just kind of like, and that was it. Constantly just winging it, trying to figure things out as you were going along, getting yourselves in weird positions. Sometimes we wouldn't find anywhere. We'd end up like sleeping on the street or in we'd find a public park and we'd find like a utility building and climb up on the roof and make like a little tent on the roof or something out of cardboard boxes and some plastic and then sleep there. And it was just that constantly. And I guess it was this chaos and never really knowing what was going to happen next, who you were going to meet, coming across like millions of different kinds of people. This was really, really scary all the time, but then exciting at the same time. Like it was living a paradox. It was really, really weird, and it was more to do with this uncertainty that traveling exposes you to, which the best explanation or comparison to that. Have you ever been swimming in the ocean at night? Do you get this? Yes. The ocean's like, you can barely, like, especially if it's the tide's been kicking up a fuss a bit and the water's a bit murky. And you can maybe see a meter in front of your face or not even that far in front of you. But when it's nighttime and there's like, you're in the water and you're looking out into the direction of the open ocean, and there's something about that, the feeling that you get of that. Like that is just the open unknown. And it's not just the open unknown, like God knows what's in that water. Like there could be a shark a couple of meters away from my face. I could, my moment could end, my ending moment, my death could be here. And I don't know because the water is just too, like I can't see through it. It's nighttime. I'm in there and there's all these things that could be there. That, there could be like this huge circus of fish. God knows. I don't know what's going on. But there was just this experience of absolute terror that would overcome me. And then I'd have this weird kind of moment where I'd be aware of my terror and of my fear and of the danger, but I'd fight it. And I'd refuse to do what my body wanted me to do. So my body wanted me to swim away, to get out of the water as quickly as possible, and to leave and to get myself to safety. But for some reason, I don't know why, I love to just, I didn't even love it. It was horrible. But I'd force myself to feel the terror and I'd refuse to move despite every part of my body screaming for me to leave. And I would just kind of swim there, looking out into the dark water, just picturing all the bad things that could possibly happen, and then allowing the fear to overtake me and allowing it to consume me and not reacting to it. And traveling was kind of like that all the time. Like I was always in these strange places. Like bad things could happen at any moment, and sometimes they did. Like I got into some fights, I got robbed, I got lost, I got attacked, I got bit, I got, there was a lot of things going on constantly. And there was all these amazing experiences that were really great and filled with joy and pleasure and excitement. But there was lots of really terrifying experiences. There was deaths. So really horrible things you would see. And it was the biggest roller coaster. It was a constant up and a constant down, and like you never knew what was around the next corner. And it was just like constantly being in that ocean, looking out into the dark at night. Like that's what traveling was. And you become acclimatized to it. And that was really strange. Like you get to a point where you've met so many weird people and so many good people, and you've experienced like the worst of humanity and the best of humanity. You know, you've there was one guy who was a Satanist, and I won't go too much into him, but he was a scary guy, and he opened up at one point and admitted that he'd murdered someone once, and so you sat here with someone who, you know, maybe he was lying, but maybe he wasn't. You know, this guy could be a potential murderer, and I'm just sat here on my own in the dark of this random place in Thailand. Maybe I could be his next victim. And he was really unpredictable and really weird. And then there was just absolute strangers that didn't really have anything, and they would give you everything. And they'd let you into their home, and they'd feed you and trust you enough to let you sleep in their house. And they'd wake you up and give you breakfast. And if you needed to go somewhere, they'd take you there. And it was basically in that 18 months, like I'd probably experienced more than I had done, on like tenfold than I had done in my entire life prior to that. And it's not to say that my life prior to that wasn't already eventful. Like I'd experienced quite a lot of deaths. My dad died when I was 9. His brother, my uncle, died a year later. I lost both my grandmas. I lost my granddad. Yeah, you know, there's been a lot of crazy stuff going on. And all of this kind of really, really forces you to think about your own mortality, your own approach to death. And I really, really think it's important. And I think this is one of the biggest issues with youth, or just not even youth, just people, the modern person today, is they don't often consider their own mortality. They don't often consider that one day they will die, like those who came before them. And what is it that's going to happen after that point? Are you just going to turn into dust? And is that the end of it? Or is there some sense of cosmic justice at play here? And will you be held accountable for everything you did or did not do in your life? And one thing that kind of struck me as well, because obviously traveling, you're talking to a lot of people from a lot of different places, a lot of different beliefs. And a common thing I found was people would often say, oh, you know, I'm not bad. I don't do bad things, as if not doing bad things is itself enough to make you a good person. As if, oh, I've never murdered anyone, or I've never, done this. I've never done that. But then you'd speak to them enough, and they'll admit they've still done bad things. You know, they have stolen, they have maybe cheated, they have maybe done this and done that. No one's perfect. Everyone has their problems, but they still see themselves as good. But they're not necessarily very charitable. They're not necessarily doing many things for other people. And the question arises, like, am I doing enough? Have I done enough? If it turns out that there is a life after death, and I'm faced with a being that I can't hide anything from, he knows everything I've ever done, everything I had the opportunity to do and didn't do. He knows the parts of the heart that you conceal from the world, and thoughts in your mind that you don't share with anyone. All of this would, if that moment arised, I be proud of myself or not? And so I spent a very, very long time thinking about that, thinking about whether or not I do believe in that, whether or not I have enough reason to believe that this is possible. And obviously it all interlinks, it all plays, it's all part of one big story, which is my life, and every element of it from birth to the present kind of led me step by step closer and closer to Islam. And, it's not to say that there isn't some sort of nostalgia or, there's a part of me that wishes that maybe, things would have been a million times easier if Christianity was true. That would have made things a lot easier with my family, for example, who are already Catholic Christians. That would have made things a lot easier just kind of being in a society that's sort of mostly Christian Catholic. Not Catholic necessarily, there's a lot of Protestants here in the UK as well. But yeah, Christian, I wouldn't stand out as much. as I do being a Muslim with my big beard and having to pray 5 times a day, and being told music's haram, and having to fast the month of Ramadan. There's a lot of hardship that comes with being a Muslim. And there's a bit that maybe looking at Christianity, it would have been nice had that been true, but it's just, there's nothing in me that believes that, which causes a bit of sadness as well, because obviously there's this leaving behind your family's tradition, your history. There's always an element of, especially considering like I'm the only Muslim in my family, where you kind of get the sense that people feel like you've maybe let their side down a bit, or that you've sort of betrayed them. Like I've been called, not by family, the family have been for the most part very accommodating, although they don't necessarily agree with my decision. But like from people from where I live, I've been called a race traitor, a this or that. So yeah, there's that.
Okay, cool. I noticed then that, from your story earlier, that you started, being agnostic and considering what religions is actually the right one, and you overlooked like Mormonism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, basically the Abrahamic religions, because you weren't interested in the multiplicity of the like Hinduism and even in Buddhism. So, and I guess you sort of had already has standard for yourself for what religion you would accept, right? And you told us the criteria to, and the filter that you had, and on why you critically dismiss Christianity and Judaism and all the others except for Islam, right? And by using logic and your reasoning. So how would you say though that your because when it comes to studying like Christianity, there are so many like forms of Christianity, but in terms of their denominations. But I guess like what you really criticized there was the center of Christian creed, right? Like of who Jesus is and what they believe Jesus is, and also the Trinity. So
it wasn't just that as well. It was also like accepting Christianity to be true. To such a degree that you deny, like even if I was to accept certain parts of Christianity, I couldn't deny that I believed Islam to be true. So there was that as well, and there was nothing that I really felt could argue with many of the points that were being made. So like I couldn't help but see Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a prophet. He went through 20 odd years of tribulations. They offered him money, they offered him power, they offered him status, and like despite the amount of suffering that him and the people that were following him were experiencing, they didn't budge from that, despite being in a position of extreme imbalance. Like there was the boycott against them, and if anything was motivating him other than his sheer conviction, and the same for those who followed him, there was countless points along that line, even prior to before the moving from Mecca to Medina, where they could have given that up and the situation would have been so much better for them. They wouldn't have been starving, they wouldn't have been boycotted, they wouldn't have been persecuted and tortured. And there's to me the only thing that kind of held that conviction would have been a belief that it was true. Like there didn't seem to be any benefit other than the sheer conviction of feeling as being on the truth. And then obviously even when they went to Medina, there was still countless tribulations. They were constantly getting attacked, they were surrounded, they were dealing with treason from within, and people abandoning them and plotting against them. And so this played an element in as far as like trying to wrap my head around what the Trinity meant exactly. Whether or not that or this pure conception of God. And Surah Ikhlas is probably the best example of kind of just this, which funny enough mapped onto my mother's, and my mother never studied Islam, but it mapped onto her understanding of God as well. Because one of the things that kind of, when she was, like, obviously, like I said, we were younger, we used to go to church a lot, and we had this particular priest, and my mum was always asking them questions, and it was like, especially with Catholicism, there's a lot of idols, there's a lot of images, a lot of pictures, and the questions my mum used to ask used to stick. It's like, who are these people? Like in Catholic churches, there's a lot of pictures of Jesus. There's a lot of images of Jesus and statues of Jesus. And one question I couldn't help but ask is, how on earth did they know that Jesus looked like that? How we've got no pictures of him. We've not got, like, where are these images coming from? Like, how do you know that's what Jesus looked like? And if Jesus looked completely different to that, who on earth are you worshipping here when you're looking at these idols or praying to these idols? And with Catholicism, there was a lot of like worshipping statues of Mary going on as well, and or even saints. Like my family in Scotland have a habit of praying to saints and asking saints for protection and asking saints for this and asking saints for that. And I could never understand why on earth, if God exists and God is the source of all power and God is the one that's in control of everything here, why not just go straight to him? Why ask all these little finite beings that died in the end, that they themselves couldn't help themselves? What on earth makes anyone think that they could help you or help me? It just seemed extremely pointless and incomprehensible. Like I couldn't help but feel that this was all really pointless. Why not just go straight to the one that made you and made the one that you're turning to? What are these saints going to do for you now? And so that was one big element of it for Catholicism in particular, that I just really I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't make any sense to me. It seemed contrary to this whole don't worship any God but me. And all of these acts seems like some form of worship. Like, if you're asking someone for something that's dead and you're asking them for protection, protect me from this, give me this, I need good fortune, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, I don't know. It just seemed absurd to me. And my mum asked these similar questions to this. And when we would ask, or she would ask about, why do you consider Jesus God? And so she ended up with this similar monotheistic belief that sort of rubbed off on me as well, I guess. Although she's not a Muslim still. She's still Christian, I think, but I don't think she believes that Jesus is God either. So if anything, she's probably a Unitarian Christian. But so again, it was numbers and numbers of different elements coming from a number of different places, as well as kind of internally and externally from Christianity, that there were things going on when looking at Islam, and certain things were pushing me away from Christianity while other things were pulling me towards Islam. So there's like equal, there was forces going on everywhere. It wasn't just a case of looking at Islam alone and just kind of moving towards that while neglecting Christianity and not taking it seriously or thinking about it, or at least hoping it was an answer, because that would have been a million times easier for me if it was.
All right. Well, okay. Then what you said also was that you were really convinced of the Prophet Muhammad as being the last messenger, right, of Allah. And also, I guess, so when it comes to like your analysis of the Quran and everything, and just understanding the whole religion, did you what thought process did you come through to arrive that it is in fact the truth? Like, how did you like fully confirm it to yourself?
Yeah, so we might. So I'll try and give you as much of an answer as I can. It's obviously quite a big subject area, and we've just hit over an hour now. So I've got a few things I will need to go and do, but in brief, So could you just repeat the question again? So what was it specifically about the Quran or Muhammad or?
Just how did you confirm to yourself that Islam is in fact the true religion?
Okay. So one was its conception of Tawheed, which just seemed superior to me in terms of this idea of God, God being one, and one in the sense that he is indivisible and he's not subject to multiplication, that he's this, he's a necessary being, he's eternal, he precedes all that is created, and everything created completely relies upon him, and he is distinct from it. He is, there is no comparison to him. He is ultimately unique. And, so there's the whole idea of Tawheed mapped on very well to how I understood if God exists, what kind of God would he be? So that was one of the reasons. And obviously Jesus still played a major role in what religion I was choosing. So I was looking at Jesus and, does it make sense to call him a God, or does it make sense to call him a man? And I couldn't help but incline to just saying, when I looked at what was going on in the Bible, although there are these really ambiguous verses that kind of allude to the concept of him being the Son of God, I was aware as well that the Jews would often refer to people as the Son of God when they were pious, or this idea of being the Son of God to me didn't necessitate the idea that he was God. So that played a key factor in it. And then obviously, what other religions considered him to be a great man, and not like there wasn't really this formalized version of a Unitarian Christian church that was really doing that well enough with its apologetics. Like it wasn't, there was no convincing argument for me to say that Unitarian Christian beliefs were true, and that Islam was false. Because insofar as there was Unitarian Christians, okay, I can accept that. But then now we have to deal with the claims that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet. And you look at the Quran, and there's a lot of really mad things going on with the Quran. So you got this man who was illiterate. He was known to be a shepherd. Like he would watch over animals in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't someone who was educated in many things at all. And he was just a simple guy. He was known as an honest person. He was married to a wealthy woman. He had everything he wanted. And then for some reason, this man completely turned his life upside down, and all those who cared for him, by making a particular claim in that he was pushing for pure monotheism. And even though all of this chaos was happening, and that the Quran was revealed over a period of 20 years, piece by piece, bit by bit, it was being compiled in a random order. So it wasn't that page 1 was day 1, page 2, day 2. It wasn't like that. It was being revealed in this kind of like higgledy-piggledy way, which can only be kind of described as similar to you getting a jigsaw puzzle and you're not being in control of the pieces that you're given, but someone comes and they give you a piece, and then you put the piece down on the floor exactly where it was supposed to go, without comparing it to other pieces or anything like that. Someone gives you the piece and you know exactly where that piece is to go straight away, and you put it down. And then they give you another piece, and it's not necessarily next to it. And you just, over the period of 23 years, you're building this jigsaw puzzle, and you just happen to know where these pieces go. And then at the end, you've got this picture that just is coherent. It's complete. Like Surah Baqarah, there's a really good video on a YouTube channel called Many Prophets, One Message. And it describes this Surah Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran. It's called the Cow. And this chapter, it's got something in it called ring composition, where the first parts of the chapter mirror the second parts, and they all meet in the middle. And the middle verse of this chapter, this is just one example. This is one of my favorites, so I'll bring this one up. And the middle chapter is the Kaaba. It mentions the Kaaba. The very middle verse, of this chapter mentions the Kaaba. And you've got this echoing of the pattern or the theme of the first part of this chapter mirrors the second part, or the last part in the equal place. And then the second part of the chapter mirrors the second to last part of the chapter. And you get this pattern that meets all the way through to the middle verse, which is about the Kaaba. And then in these parts, in these bits, there's more circles. So there's more of this mirroring. Like I say, if you search the ring composition on the YouTube channel, Many Prophets, One Message, it goes into a lot more detail than I'm going to be able to do here with the time that I've got, because I need to go by past. What time is it now? So I've got about 6 minutes spare. But so with regards to that, so that was just one element. So you just got this book, which to me, there was other evidence as well that there was observations of the hadith, which are the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they really kind of broke it down into its parts and looked at the choice of words that we used, the kind of patterns that would occur, and then they did the same thing with the Quran. And what they found is the way that the Prophet spoke and the way the words that were recorded that the Prophet spoke and what he said, they did not match the words of the Quran, in the sense that they were recognized to be from different authors. So whoever wrote the Quran was not the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The author of the Quran was a distinct being from the Prophet Muhammad, and there was people. The mutawatir, which is mass transmissions, people witnessed a lot of things that were going on that were quite miraculous in the nature of the Prophet. You had these people that were 1 minute murderous, and you wouldn't be far off calling them questionable types, and they would get to know the Prophet and they would completely transform into amazing people. And yeah, I'm struggling obviously because of the time, but there's a lot going on with the Quran that shows that it's a distinct book, that Muhammad wasn't the author. There's a lot going on that shows Muhammad to be a truthful character, that wasn't in it for just power, money. You can look at videos of his house. So if you go on YouTube and search Prophet Muhammad's home, you can see how he lived. He lived simply. He lived like anyone else that lived in his time. He lived in a little wood hut, with very few possessions. He was he could have ate like a king, but he constantly told people to eat very little. He prayed throughout the night, and he was often caught praying throughout the night, and for a lot of hours, for a long time. Whereas if he didn't really believe what he was receiving was from God, and if he didn't really believe that he had this responsibility, what motivation would there be for a man to spend the entire night praying, to give away everything that he gave? He gave so much in charity. He gave, and all to live in a little mud hut that he'd lived in. So there's a lot of cookie crumbs involved in the whole process of kind of leading oneself to Islam, and that's a little brief kind of introduction, I guess, and there's a lot more people can look into, but I'll leave that for another day, inshallah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, bro. And if you're interested, to the audience, if you're interested in Yusuf, he has a YouTube channel. You can check it out on the link below. And yeah, thanks so much for your awesome time, bro. And
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you the best of luck with your podcast. Keep it going. May God bless you, and I'll speak again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
It used to be hard to find the exact auto parts you needed, and that meant spending a lot of time at swap meets. It's a different game now when you can order exactly what you need from eBay Motors. They have 122 million parts, so you can always find the right fitment. Spend less time searching and more time building with the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
The skills and credentials you need for the career you want are within reach at University of Maryland Global Campus. An accredited state university, UMGC offers online courses, personalized advising, lifetime career services, and more. Visit umgc.edu/podcast.